We are in the last, well, don't know about that, potentially the last three of the Songs of Ascent. I believe Psalm 132 is another one of these Davidic psalms, as they say. And it is, like I said, it was 15 different Songs of Ascent. And that would make this the 13th, potentially, 13th Song of Ascent. And these were sung, it's believed, on the way to and in Jerusalem for the three different festivals that all the... Oh, somebody's coming down the hall. But anyhow, the three festivals, which I'm at a loss right now. I know Passover was one, Tabernacles was one, and I don't know if Day of Atonement or maybe Pentecost was maybe the one, and not Tabernacles. I'm not sure. But anyhow, the three main festivals that everybody, or all the men, were required to come to Jerusalem for. And this one is, again, Psalm 132. And thing here says this is another, again, the Song of Ascents. Says no author associated with its title. Some believe David was the author. Some believe it was written after the exile. James Montgomery Boyce made the case for Solomon as the author. Since Psalm 132, 8 through 10 are quoted in 2 Chronicles 6, 41 through 42 as part of Solomon's prayer at the dedication of the temple, the psalm probably dates from Solomon's reign, even though the title does not identify it as Solomon's psalm. Or if it was an earlier psalm, he might have just quoted it as well. There's a way to think about that. Because the coming of the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem is referred to in Psalm 132, 6 through 9, Psalm 24 and Psalm 68 also refer to this event, which is described more fully in 1 Chronicles 15 through 16. So this psalm is alluded to twice in the New Testament. Stephen refers to it in Acts 7:46, and Peter alludes to it in Acts 2:30. So two different references there in the New Testament for this. So, this is a little bit longer than the ones we've seen, and the next two after this. So if someone would like to read the first 5 verses of this psalm.
Lord, remember David and all his afflictions, how he swore to the Lord and vowed to the mighty one of Jacob. Surely I will not go into the chamber of my house, or go up to the comfort of my bed. I will not give sleep to my eyes, or slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. And the heading was the eternal dwelling of God in Zion, a Song of Ascent.
Thank you. Yep, a Song of Ascents, that's the inscription that starts this. And the singer began by remembering David, the great king of Israel, and all the afflictions he had endured. Apart from the Messiah, who was given the title Son of David, David, the son of Jesse, is acknowledged as Israel's greatest king. Yet he had to endure a remarkable number of afflictions. And you can see all these, has a list here of things that were endured by David, or were true of David. He was despised and criticized by his family. He was placed in many life and death struggles. He was accused of treason and treachery. He was attacked by the connected, powerful, and the ruthless. He lived many years as a fugitive, a wanted man. He had family, home, friends, and career taken from him. He experienced a significant season of backsliding. He was accepted as the king only reluctantly. He faced many enemies in battle through many wars. He was openly criticized and despised by his wife. He suffered because of his own sin and scandal. He endured great conflict and problems among his own children. He suffered a coup staged by his son, followed by a civil war. He was openly despised and criticized by some of his subjects. And I mentioned before that if you go through maybe not so much in First or Second Samuel, but in First, Second Kings, and maybe in Chronicles as well. It seems like anytime there's a king in Judah, the southern kingdom, they're always compared to David, whether they walked in, faith like David, or they didn't walk like David, or they walked like David, but they still didn't do this other thing. And so he was basically was like the gold standard, the one that all the kings of Israel were compared to. And in the northern kingdom, with Jeroboam, God promised him he'd make him like David if he followed, but he didn't, and then he became like whatever the opposite of a gold standard is, he became like the warning. So every single, seemed like king after that, it was like, oh, but he followed in the sins of Jeroboam and caused the people to go after false gods and that. Anyhow, the psalmist asked God to look upon and remember both David himself and all his afflictions. He prayed, Lord, consider the man and consider his troubles. Let none of them be forgotten or wasted. The afflictions of David always suggest the afflictions of his greater son, that God would remember the far greater afflictions sustained for our sake by the Messiah in the days of his humiliation, when through much tribulation he accomplished our redemption and entered into his glory in petition, or is the petition preferred in these words by us Christians. So yeah, I guess we would think of this as looking at it, thinking about how Jesus, all that he did for us. And our first question there, the answer is the psalmist begins by asking the Lord to remember David and all his what? Afflictions. Very good. Thank you. And how he swore to the Lord. The poet asks Yahweh to remember a specific oath David made to him. The oath itself is not recorded in 2 Samuel 7, but the heart behind it is recorded there. It says, wearied with a stormy life, he might well have left it to others to care for the work. He will put his own comfort second, God's service first. And David, and this is question number 2 there. David vowed not to give what?
Sleep.
Yeah, right. Not to give sleep to his eyes until he found a place for the Lord. And we know that David wanted to build a house for the Lord, a tabernacle, because he'd made himself a palace and felt bad about the fact that he didn't have anything for God. God was still in the tent, the tabernacle that they had back from the Exodus that they had made there in the wilderness and had brought in, and it was still where the ark was when it was in their possession, or some of the time it was in their possession, I should say. And he thought they needed to do something better, and God didn't want David to build it. But he did tell David that his son would build it, and then David went ahead and he did a lot of preparations for it. He gathered a lot of stuff for it, and as the thing there says about where he says, until I find a place for the Lord, a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob, even though he didn't build the temple itself, he did find the place where the temple was going to be, and that was at I think what's his name's threshing floor or whatever. Whenever David had done a census, and the angel of the Lord was coming through and killing everybody.
Didn't David have a lot of the stuff already prepared, but then it was a long time after his son took over before they got this temple built, right?
Yeah, it took him a while to get it built, but it was after, basically he when God told him that he couldn't build it, he kind of said, well, God said I couldn't build it, but he didn't say I couldn't prepare for it, right. So he gathered up all the stuff that he knew that he was going to need for it, all the rich, luxurious things they were going to use. David, got all that stuff as much as he could together. Mm-hmm. And then, and it took Solomon quite a while to build it. I'm not sure.
Before he started it, wasn't it? He didn't start it as soon as he became king, no.
Yeah, he had some other stuff, I guess.
Yeah, he had to do other stuff, yeah. So, okay.
Yeah. He had to kill some people, basically, if you look at it. A lot of people that had wronged David. And also wronged him. But, anywho, again, David had asked Nathan the prophet for permission to build the temple. Nathan said yes, and then God said, hold up, wait a minute, you didn't ask me. And so he promised David that he would build him a house, and that his son would build a temple. And in that also is the prophecy of the Son of David, of Jesus coming for the kingdom without end and all of that. So as we see, he didn't build it, but he did find a place for it. And it says David's passion speaks to us in at least two ways. We should have a passionate drive to enjoy God's presence in our lives, that our hearts would truly be his home, and we should have a passionate drive for the blessing and benefit of the house of God, the community of his people. And so we should, like David, really be concerned about the things of God. Spurgeon said, I wish that this same zeal would take firm hold of all Christians. How many there are who dwell in their sealed houses while the house of the Lord lies waste. They can provide abundantly for themselves, but for God's cause, for God's gospel, for a place wherein the poor may meet for the preaching of the word, they do not seem to care. And we also have here in this a dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. And the designation mighty one of Jacob derives from Genesis 49:24 and signifies the marvelous manner in which the Lord had protected, guided, and blessed Jacob. And of course, Jacob, God renamed him Israel. That's why we have, the nation of Israel and the tribes of Israel. But also sometimes, just to mix it up, they put Jacob in there. So the epithet denotes the great strength of the Lord as the divine warrior. And David swore to find a what? Place? A dwelling place for the mighty one of Jacob. Very good. And now let's look on now to the next 4 verses, 6 through 9.
Behold, we heard of it in Ephrathah. We found it in the fields of the woods. Let us go into his tabernacle. Let us worship at his footstool. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness, and your saints shout for joy.
Thank you. Yes, behold, we have heard it. Most all commentators understand it here to mean the Ark of the Covenant and the tabernacle associated with it. The it there. We have heard of it. Somebody's buzzing.
So they found it in the woods? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just sitting there in the woods?
Well, we'll see about that. For one thing, we know that during the time before the kings, when Samuel was still somewhat young, that they took the ark out. They basically went out to battle and they lost, and then they said, you know what, we'll get God's favor not by obeying God or seeing where they had sinned. They said, we'll just take the ark out there, then definitely he'll be with us then. And not the case. Philistines took the ark, and they killed Eli's 2 sons. And then Eli, when he heard about it, he dropped over dead. And they had the ark for a while. Well, they tried to have it for a while, but that didn't work out too well for them, because God wasn't happy with the ark being there and being in their Dagon or whatever it was, temple to that. And so they ended up sending it out, and it just kind of, basically they just put it on a cart with some new ox, and it just wandered, but it was like guided by God, so it like wandered back to Israel. And then they left it at one place, and then they, like, the people looked inside it or something like that. They disrespected it, and then a bunch of them died.
If you touch it, you die, right?
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
No one about it.
But it's interesting. You think that, I mean, it would appear that God, even though he was like, really afflicting the Philistines, he apparently didn't just, wipe them all out, but they somehow managed to get the ark to their place and then get it on this new cart and then send it off. So God was kind of like lenient a bit They didn't have the word. They didn't have the instructions like the Israelites did. So maybe that's what it's talking about here. Yeah. It says here, after the Ark of the Covenant was returned by the Philistines in the days of Saul, it rested at the house of Abinadab in Kiriath Jearim until David decided to move it to Jerusalem. So I guess you can think of it just it was in the...
They got rich while everything turned out really good for them while had that.
Yeah. It moved from like one to this other, and then it was like really good, and they appointed a person to...
Then David
watch
decided
over
to go get it, or Solomon did so.
Yeah, David went and got it finally.
Yeah.
First they did it in the wrong way, and they thought they could do it the same way that I guess the Philistines did, putting it on a cart.
Didn't the Philistines took it, and right? Is
Yeah.
that the story? And then it caused them so much.
Oh yeah, overran
death
with rats and tumors and all
yeah.
kinds of nonsense. Yeah,
Just give it back.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But they
said,
put it on wheels when it should have been carried.
Yeah, but again, I think because the Philistines didn't know any better, they
Yeah.
didn't know what they're supposed to do. God was like, fine, just as long as you guys are sending it back where it belongs. But the Israelites should have known better. Like David should have looked into it and said, okay, how are we supposed to transport this? And instead they say, well, it came on a cart, let's put it on a cart. And then even that was, that was fine until a guy reached out and tried to steady it. And then he got struck dead. And then, they didn't do anything for a little bit. And then finally they came and did it the right way with the people who are supposed to carry it, the certain priests and in a certain way and all that. And so I guess like the translation that this guy used here has found it in the fields of the woods. Like mine has found it in the fields of Jaar.
yeah, I was going to say mine.
Which
Bible says that too.
Yeah, might be
It's
this.
like a footnote type thing. It says Hebrew Jaar.
Yeah, that's what mine says, like yours, yeah.
Yeah, mine does too.
I don't know. It's Jaar.
Woods? Mine
Yeah.
says woods.
Woods.
Yeah. I mean,
This
mine
is a
says woods
footnote.
too, and then it's got a little
Oh,
thing to look down at the bottom.
yeah, mine's this too.
It says
Jar.
whatever Jaar is.
7. Good night. It couldn't be any smaller. It has 1 Samuel 7:11, which is, or no,
Sorry.
1712.
yeah, 1 Samuel 7:11, I guess, was probably talking about that,
No.
where it wound up at. Heard of it in Ephrathah, probably refers to David's younger days in Ephrathah, which was an earlier name for Bethlehem, when he and his family had heard of the ark but had not seen it. So that'd be interesting to think, the fact that for a long time they didn't even have the ark even there. But anywho.
And nobody knows where it's at now.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea there.
Revelation says it's in heaven.
That's
Well,
true.
the question is, though, is it like talking about the fact that there's the real thing in heaven and the shadow of the thing that's on the earth that was made? Hebrews talks about how everything in the temple was basically just a copy of the real thing that was up in heaven, and so maybe it's
I just
that,
know
or
that
maybe
it says
God,
it in.
yeah, or maybe God took it up to heaven, said, "Fine."
The ox drug it
So
all
you
the way
guys
out.
can't take care of it any better than that.
Yeah.
Just bring it up here, I guess.
Where it's supposed to be at, right?
Yeah.
It is hard to say.
Yeah, I wondered when John seen that there, whether that was that future, or was that present, or at that time?
It's hard to say. You think about heaven and stuff like that. I mean, is it still in time? It seemed like there's the thought of time, that people understood that, like the martyred saints, were asking, how much longer are we going to wait? So at the same time, maybe there is like time for a while, but maybe for a while we're in time, and then after a little bit it'll be, at the end it'll be back outside of time again. Then you get to eternity.
Like 1,000 days like a year, or
Yeah.
a day like 1,000 years, 1,000 years like a day, or something.
Maybe. So, question 4. The psalm references hearing of the ark in where? Ephrathah. Yeah, Ephrathah. and finding it in the fields of the woods, or in the fields of Jaar. I believe in,
Is Jar a place you think?
could be. I mean, it's
I
certainly,
mean, like a area like
it's certainly,
Effingham County, you know, or
it could actually even be like,
I thought it was the woods. And
Well-
in their language, in the Hebrew, you know,
Yeah.
it's capitalized. In the Hebrew language, I thought.
yeah, like mine's capitalized, and it could be that maybe it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, like that guy's woods, like the woods that he owned.
Yeah.
He'd give you permission to hunt there or not.
Because it has got a capital J.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
so it's kind of interesting. And, oh man. There's the capture and return of the ark. It has a little picture here. It shows them taken from Shiloh to Ebenezer, to Aphek, back down to Ashdod, then to Gath, and then to Ekron, and then to Beth Shemesh, and then to Jeram. But in verse 11, it says, the men of Israel went out from Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them as far as Beth-kar. Well, that gives me absolutely nothing.
I read that.
My Bible,
Didn't tell me
says
nothing.
something about reference to the region of Bethlehem.
Yeah, that's
Ruth
Ephrathah.
1:2.
Yeah, that's basically where the David's family came from. Ruth and Boaz had a kid. They have Jesse? What was it after that? But I believe this is in Micah. It refers to Bethlehem of Ephrathah, I think, which is talking about, yeah, in Micah 5:2. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah. And so it was like Bethlehem is like one name for it, and Ephrathah was another. And if there was other Ephrathahs or other Bethlehems, putting them together, you knew that's where it was talking about. But any of that was number 4. Let us go into his tabernacle. As one of these songs of ascent, this song was sung by travelers going to the temple in Jerusalem, mainly at feast times. They remembered and understood David's great heart for God's house and used it to inspire them. As they said, let us go into his tabernacle, let us worship at his footstool. So, question 5, the pilgrims sang, let us go into his tabernacle, let's worship at his footstool. And a footstool was how that Solomon had described it, saying that, obviously they can't build a house for God, what can contain God. But basically that it was like, this would be like his footstool, a place that he would look to and think about. And it said also, arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you in the ark of your might. Did we read that already?
You read down to 9.
Yeah, down to 9. That's
Yeah.
right. Okay. The pilgrims on their journey remembered the words of Moses in the wilderness, who called out when the ark traveled, rise up, O Lord, let your enemies be scattered, and let those who hate you flee before you. That's in Numbers 10:35. Though the ark of God's strength had found its resting place, this was still an appropriate saying for a pilgrim people. So the psalmist prays, and this is number 6 on the list there, arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and the ark of your strength. Let your priests be clothed with righteousness. When they sang of the goodness of the glory of God's temple, they also remembered the position of the priest. It was fitting for them to be known for righteousness in life, and this would make God's saints shout for joy. So the pure vestments of the priests were symbols of stainless character befitting the ministers of a holy God. The psalmist prays that the symbol may truly represent the inner reality. So when God's servants are not clothed with righteousness, it can cause God's people to lose some of their joy, or a lot of their joy. There is no surer sign of God's gracious presence with a people than a powerful ministry clothed with inward purity and holiness, represented by the holy garments. And again, back to Eli, his sons were like the worst, and it made so the people didn't even want to come to the temple because they were like bullies, basically taking what didn't belong to them and doing all kind of bad stuff. And Eli kind of half-heartedly said, "Hey, you guys, cut it out." And it's like, "Nah." And he goes, "All right, well, I guess don't then." But because of the way that they acted, it like people didn't even want to come to the temple. And so it's a good thing here. What it's saying here, the priests be clothed with righteousness. And then we have the promise of God's blessing in verse 10. If someone would like to read that.
For your servant David's sake, do not turn away the face of your anointed.
Thank you. God promised that he would not forsake the sons of David. That was part of that 2 Samuel 7:14 through 16. When the psalmist prayed this, he prayed for the fulfillment of a promise God had already made. For his sake, all those who were anointed in him are accepted. God blessed Solomon and succeeding kings for David's sake, and he will bless us for Jesus' sake, said Spurgeon. And of course, we've looked at, and that when Solomon got older and his heart turned away from God towards all the different false gods and things that all of his different wives and concubines or whatever had kind of convinced him to set up, that God said he was going to take the kingdom away, but for the sake of David, he was going to let it after Solomon's time. And then even then, he wasn't going to take it all away on account of David. He was going to leave them with just one, essentially, but it kind of ended up being more.
Like a remnant.
Somewhat like that, yeah. Just basically that God, and it's other times too. I think I saw something, maybe that was today, this morning, and would have been in 2 Kings. Again, saying that, where it's like, but because of David, I'm gonna allow there still to be someone like in Israel, still be a light in the house of Judah. But do not turn away the face of your anointed. The singer asked that the favor of God would never be taken away from his anointed. There was a sense in which every king of David's line was God's anointed, because kings were among those that got anointed. Priests got anointed, kings got anointed, prophets got anointed. But this ultimately looks to the anointed one, which is what Messiah means. Messiah means anointed one, and that's Jesus Christ. And Christ also means Messiah. So it's the ultimate anointed one himself, Jesus, the anointed one. That's kind of how that would read. This is ultimately a prayer for blessing on God's Messiah, the anointed son of David. And again, all the kings were anointed, but ultimately this is talking about Jesus.
Oh, I thought they was talking about David, not to turn away from David.
Well, it like multiple things. It means
okay.
I think, and of course it depends
But
on.
he was anointed. So.
Yeah, David was anointed king, and also like Solomon was, and
Right.
All the kings were anointed. And so in one aspect, it's talking about looking at the kings of Israel, but the ultimate end of that is Jesus. He is the ultimate king of Israel, the ultimate son of David. He's what all the others are pointing to and should have aspired to be. And the prayer upholds David by special designation, your servant and your anointed one. These designations apply to David and to all his descendants who were anointed as kings over Israel or Judah. Although none of his descendants were anointed as kings over Israel, but still. And that was a thing that David had referred to Saul as often, about I won't lift my hand to God's anointed, because he was anointed by Samuel on behalf of God to be the king, and so David respected that. And let's look now at verses 11 and 12.
The Lord has sworn in truth to David, he will not turn from it. I will set upon your throne and fruit of your body. if your sons will keep my covenant and my testimony, which I shall teach them, their sons also shall sit upon your throne forevermore.
Thank you. I said earlier in Psalm 132:2, the singer remembered how David made a solemn oath to God. In return, God made a solemn oath to David. As recorded in 2 Samuel 7:5-16, God would never turn from such an oath. There was definitely a connection between the two oaths. Of course, David said, I want to do this. And then God sent Nathan back saying, no, you're not going to do that. I'm going to do this for you instead. He goes, but, there's some caveats there. Your son will do that afterwards. And that was, of course, talking about Solomon, but ultimately talking about Jesus, even more so. Jehovah's promise to establish a dynasty in Zion was made to the man who undertook to provide a tabernacle for God in the midst of the city. So says G. Campbell Morgan. Through the narrative in Samuel pertaining to the promises to David, again 2 Samuel 7:12-16, makes no mention of an oath. There is a poetic expression for the certainty of God's promise to David. God says something, he's going to keep it. And number 7 is, the Lord has sworn in truth to David that he will set the fruit of David's body upon his throne. And the psalmist remembered the promises God made to David, again in 2 Samuel 7. These were the promise God confirmed with an oath. This was a conditional with respect to the posterity of David. They have been driven from the throne because they did not keep the Lord's covenant, but the true David is on the throne. So again, it's talking about David's offspring all the way up to Jesus, but we know that as it was a conditional type thing, if they keep the covenant, if they follow my ways, then they'll be there on the throne all this time. But they kept messing up. First was Solomon, and then his son, and then on and on and on. And you go through, you'll see that there were some kings that were better, some kings that were worse, and on and on. And finally, they got completely taken out of the land. Tabernacle destroyed, they were taken away, and there hasn't been a king in Israel since then. There's been like governors and people in positions of power, but of course everything points again to Jesus in that. So let's look now at verses 13-15. God's promise to Zion.
For the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired for it for his dwelling place. This is my resting place forever. Here I will dwell, for I have desired it.
Thank you. The Lord has chosen Zion. The connection is made between the choice of David and his descendants and God's choice of Jerusalem, aka Zion, as his sacred dwelling place, the place he desired. Makes a point here, the Bible is based on historical facts, real people, real events, and real places. God could have chosen any place on earth to be the stage on which his drama of redemption was displayed. But he deliberately chose Zion. His dwelling place is in no way restricted to Jerusalem and the land of Israel, but it is significant that this was the place he desired. So the Lord has chosen Zion. It says human response was all too often cynical, treating God's choice as something to be exploited, a shelter against his judgment, or an asset to be commercialized. Of course, again, that was one of the things that people thought. They said, well, yeah, maybe we're not doing what we're supposed to do, but God's never going to get rid of the temple. That's his temple and all that. And God said, well, I care a lot more for you guys to be obedient and to follow me than to bring sacrifices and have this fancy temple. And so, he got rid of it. And of course, we know that this thing about him choosing Zion, choosing Jerusalem, and that's where Jesus came and died. And that's where Jesus is going to come back again, and that's when there'll be a new temple and all this stuff. It all goes back to that place where God has chosen. So, number 8, God declares, for the Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his dwelling place. And again, it's his resting place forever. Once the Ark of the Covenant came into Jerusalem, there was to be no more traveling for the tabernacle. The tabernacle, the temple, the altar, and the ark would never rest in another place than Jerusalem. Although, obviously it ended up being taken out of there and destroyed. was I will abundantly bless her provision. God promised to have a special material blessing on Jerusalem and Israel, especially as part of the blessing for obedience connected to the Mosaic covenant. Again, in Deuteronomy 7 and Deuteronomy 28, you can see these special things that God had chosen. I think he even mentions in there, like when God chooses like the place where his name will be. So let's look now at verses 16 through 18.
I will clothe her priests with salvation, and her saints will sing for joy. Here I will make a horn grow for David, and set up a lamp for my anointed. Now I lost my place. 1. It will clothe his enemies with shame, but the crown on his head will be whatever that is.
Flourished.
Okay.
That's
Is
what
that
mine
it?
says, but that might not be what yours says.
Yeah.
Mine doesn't say that. No, it
Okay.
says, I can't say the word. But anyway, it's flourished.
All right, very good. Mine has, but on him his crown will shine, or flourish is also. I will clothe her priests with salvation. Earlier in the psalm, in verse 9, the singer prayed that the priests would be clothed in righteousness. Now he declares a promise from God that he would clothe his priests with salvation. When those who serve as God's representative are clothed with salvation, the people of God shall shout aloud for joy. So, question 9, God promises to clothe Zion's priests with what? Salvation, right. And make her saints shout for joy. There will make the horn of David grow. I will prepare a lamp for my anointed. Jerusalem would be the place where the strength promised to David and his descendants would grow. God prepared a lamp, a light, for his Messiah, his ultimate anointed one. So it's 3 terms: horn, lamp, and crown. Scarcely need comment, but Kittner's going to give us one anyways, with their evident implications of strength, clarity, and royal dignity. But note that the word used for crown, the same as the high priest mitre, draws attention to the fact that it symbolized the king's hallowing, not power alone, but holiness. But holiness is this king's, our king's, glory. And then his enemies I will clothe with shame. Any and all who oppose God's Messiah will be clothed in shame, but the anointed one's crown shall flourish. His reign shall prosper and last forever. And number 10 there, last one, says, God says of his anointed, his enemies will I clothe with shame, right? But upon himself his crown shall flourish. Their shame will be unable to hide. It will cover them. God will array them in it forever, and it shall be their convict dress to all eternity, says Spurgeon about God's enemies. The thing that they won't ever be able to escape. All right. Right up to the hour. Anybody have any thoughts or comments, questions?